Triple trouble. Well, I think they're probably going to be trouble. Welcome to another review video. These three locomotives are again from Model Rail Scotland. I got them second hand, but all three locomotives cost £20. We're going to have a look at them today, and I think there's going to be some problems and some interesting times ahead for us. So let's get into it. So these two at the front here are both from Jouef. That's a French manufacturer, but these are actually Dutch locomotives. And this one here is actually from Piko, but it's a French locomotive. So it's a bit weird. French manufacturers making Dutch locomotives and German manufacturers making French locomotives. But they are actually the same locomotive in real life. It's just got small livery changes, but essentially it's the same thing. These two are the Jouef ones, and I think we need to talk about the elephant in the room, which is the paint job on this one, which is absolutely terrible. So I'm not going to review the finish on this locomotive, and I think this is going to come in for a restoration job, make it something a bit better than this. But it is very characterful of this locomotive class. It's got this fantastic logo on the front, the NS logo there, and these lines going the whole length of the locomotive. It's got this embossed number in the middle as well, and very nice metal pantographs which work really well. They don't actually hold down very easily, so they're a bit like a mousetrap. They just spring up at the slightest touch. And also up on the roof we have a piece of metal which runs between the two pantographs and has these insulators and this raised part here which you can see straight through. Very characterful of this locomotive. Jouef have also put metal handrails on these locomotives, and inside there's no interior, but you can see that we have some wires there of the motor. Talking of which, it drives this bogie here. You can see the gearing underneath here, and pickup happens at the front. One of the bad things about Jouef models is actually the pickup. It's done on the axles and it's not very good. So I expect this to be quite a bad runner, but because I'm thinking of doing a restoration on this, I won't linger on this model just now, and we'll look at it in more depth when we come to that video. So let's have a look at this one, which is a more modern version of the one we've just seen. This is missing the wire on the top and all the insulators as well, unfortunately, but you can see that it has more holes here, so it should have had more insulators than the older one. And it looks like the pantographs have been changed as well. These ones stick down okay compared to the other ones, but they don't actually come up as high as the other ones do. The skid on the top is also wider apart and is a lot bigger too. It would seem that we have a hole here for something like a horn, which is also missing on this model, which isn't present on the other one. But because this isn't caked in paint, it's actually easier to see the details on this model, but there isn't a lot of moulding detail on this. Now that could be prototypical because this is obviously a more modern Dutch livery, and the older one has this almost Art Deco style styling down the side of it and round the front. The painting on here is actually really bad. The masking, especially here on the buffer beam, the yellow is sprayed over. It's not a crisp line either. But the transfers are quite good and very clear. And the grey is a nice colour too. Look as though we might have some illumination here on these lights, and the buffers are just plastic inserts which have been pushed into here. There's no difference I can see on the bogies here. The pickups look the same and the motor looks the same as the older version, and the couplings aren't in them pockets, but they do have a little bit of articulation there. We have traction tyres on the front here, and on the back we have pickup from the outside two wheels. So let's get this apart and we'll have a look at the mechanism. So it's fairly simple here. We have a metal pressed steel chassis where everything's attached onto it. Just a single attachment for the bogie. This one's got a weight on it where the drive is, and the pickup bogie is actually quite light here. It probably could do with a bit of weight put onto this as well, just to keep it onto the track. And it's all very simple copper contacts there. The motor revolves freely. We'll give it a try in a moment. So I initially thought that these wheels here on the pickup bogie were jammed, but actually I think this is meant to be like this. There seems to be some little cams on these wheels which lock them into place. On the older model, these are actually plastic. They are free to revolve on the older model, but what a strange setup. I don't know why they didn't just make those normal wheels. And there's another difference on this bogie where we've got the drive and not the rear. And if you look on the older model, the gearing all just goes to the two outside wheels. So there's a bit of changes going on here in the production run. I'll give the Jouef chassis a little run on the test track in a moment, but first let's have a look at this Piko model. Straight away this feels like a more mature and quality product than the two Jouef ones. It's got a lot more detail here, maybe indicative of the French railways and their love of decorating their locomotives in this era. But it's been reproduced here by Piko really well, I think. And there's a number of changes as well in the moulding. It's much more defined up here, like for this panel. And the proportions seem to be a little bit better as well. This one's got a metal handrail around the front, and it's got things like the window frames here picked out in silver, and it's got small lights on the top of the roof as well, which are picked out in silver. This one here is an extra part, a little tiny piece of plastic which has been added in. It's got a bit of a moulding mark on the top of it as well, though. This particular one is missing a buffer, which is broken off here, and we have some detail here on the buffer beam as well, the dummy coupling and some jumper pipes, and even these little tiny red lights have been picked out. Again, this looks as though it maybe has lighting. Some of the paint is coming away from that silver, but that's probably just because of age. And down the side, it's a bit different as well. These portal windows are smaller on this one. None of these windows are glazed. Very good decals, very clear printed on here. You can see Paris there as well, and Alstrom in the middle. And on top we have different types of pantographs, just a single bar going across, again made of metal, spring loaded. They work really well. And they've got plastic insulators moulded in down here as a separate part. And then we have this piece of wire on this one, a thinner gauge of wire, and an awful lot more insulators. I'd probably go with Piko having the right number here. I think Jouef have just got a random number of these. The middle part, which is raised up, is slightly different on this one. It doesn't have ridges going down the middle like the Jouef one does. Looking at the bogies, there's quite a lot of difference between the Jouef and the Piko one. I actually think Jouef have made this a lot better. There's a lot more detail and a lot more deep relief in the moulding, whereas the Piko one is a bit plainer. In the middle, just a plain box on the Piko one, and the Jouef one we have some details moulded in, and it's a much smaller piece as well. So let's get this Piko model open and we'll have a look at its mechanism as well. So a very similar design of chassis here on the Piko one. It's just a bent piece of metal. But what is surprising is that we actually have two motors here, and you can see that we have got two driven bogies as well. We've also got lighting on this one with these little light boxes. They're quite cool. They're made of metal and they have these little plastic lights here and a single bulb. This one is broken on this side, unfortunately, and at the other end of the locomotive it's still intact, both sides. We have substantial cabling on this as well. I think this is all factory. I don't think it's been changed. And on the underside of the body you can see that we have indeed got pickup from the overheads if you want to, and these neat little connectors here which fit onto the top of the bulbs. This also has a weight here, and this one is cracked as well, so this plastic is obviously getting a bit brittle over time. You can see that we have flush fit glazing on this as well. The older of the two Jouef models actually has lighting in it as well. I'm not sure if that is factory. It kind of looks a bit homemade to me, but it certainly doesn't have any overhead pickup on this model. So let's get these two chassis on the test track and we'll see how they run. I've just temporarily put a nut onto this bolt here just to keep the whole chassis together as we test this, otherwise the bogies will just slide out the chassis. So here we go, this is the Piko chassis, and as usual this is just some old Hornby track and my H&M controller on 12 volts DC. So let's give it some power, see what happens. Okay, and now the Jouef one. Well, the Jouef one is absolutely terrible, as you would expect. But what I've done is given it a bit of a clean. I did notice I had some fibres caught up in the gears. That might be causing a problem. And also I've cleaned the contacts as well. So let's give it another try and see what happens. Well, it's never going to be a great runner on a Jouef model, but it's certainly a lot better than it was before. It seems to be quite smooth now, but it does get stuck sometimes. It did give it some oil as well on the gearbox and the axles, and it seems to have just freed it up a little bit. By contrast, the Piko one works absolutely perfectly straight away. The lighting on one end works, but the other end doesn't. But that's obviously because this wire here doesn't actually connect to the bulb, it's broken off. So I'm going to have to solder that back on. So that's the next step. So the Jouef model is still absolutely hopeless. It's just wheel spinning all the time and it's not picking up very well. So I'm going to add some weights to this because it is quite light, especially at the pickup bogie here at the front. One of the other problems we have here at the front is that this gear wheel here isn't engaging with the pinion wheel on the motor that well because it moved forward a little bit. Well, the problems continue with this model. I did think it was wheel spinning quite a bit, and what I noticed was that the pinion gear on the end of the motor had actually split, and then when I tried to slide it off the pinion just to check on it, it actually broke in two. So it's obviously knackered. Well, I didn't have a spare one, so I've just stolen this off the blue locomotive and put it on here. But what has also happened is that this little split ring has actually split, and that was on the top of this gear here. So what I've done is cut a thread and put this nut on top, which is holding this down. And you can also see I've put some additional weights here because I've actually just discovered that these center wheels don't move either, and the power just goes to these wheels at the end of the locomotive, and those are the only ones that are driven with the two traction tires there. So out of all these 6 axles, only one is driven. That's absolutely terrible, and that's why it's wheel spinning all the time. So just before I put the body back on, it's worth noting that this has actually got the provision for lighting at both ends of the locomotive, but doesn't have anything on the chassis. So we've had quite a few hours now of, let's say, fun tinkering around with these old locomotives. You can't judge these by modern day standards, but comparing them like for like, the clear winner here is the Piko model. With its twin motors, the mechanics are really quite something special, and it runs really good. No problems with pickup at all either. The body shell is not too bad at all, and while the painting and execution isn't absolutely perfect, it's not bad for its time. And it could be a great base for modifying it yourself or painting it up even better than it is here. The downside for the Piko one is the moulding of the bogies, which look a bit plasticky and cheap. They could be painted up and made to look a bit better, but the plastic on them doesn't match the rest of the body shell. The lighting is also really bad, even though it's in those little cool metal boxes. They don't really work that well, but upgrading this locomotive to LED lights would really make a difference on it. Now when we turn our attention to the two Jouef models, there are loads of problems, and you can expect that from old Jouef models. I don't think they were even good when they were brand new. We've clearly got two different releases here, one more modern than the other, and the grey and yellow one doesn't have any lighting in it, even though it looks as though it maybe should do. But what lets them down, obviously, is the mechanics, which are just absolutely terrible. There's some odd decisions made here, like the middle wheels not being able to revolve and drive only going to one axle, which just isn't enough for this locomotive. It barely gets going as it is, let alone pulling a train. The blue one has been modified by the previous owner, and it's starting to really show its age now as well. It's ripe for restoration, but I had to cannibalise some parts off it to get the grey one working. So overall, these three models were £20 each. I think the Piko one is probably worth it because it's a really good model and it's got the twin motors. The two Jouef ones, I think I probably overpaid for it, but even trying to fix these ones up, they're still in terrible shape. And the blue one especially, it just looks really bad, and it's so old now as well. So today's winner is the Piko model, but let me know what you think of my analysis in the comments below. Maybe you agree with me that the Piko one is the best, or maybe you like the challenge of old Jouef models. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps this channel grow. And I'll put the Piko one on the turntable so you can see all the way around. And on screen in a moment there'll be another video. If you click on that, I'll see you over there. But that's it for this one. See ya!